The old hospital loomed over the city, a concrete colossus. It was a monolith of decay, forgotten and feared. The paint peeled from its walls like scabs from a wound. Windows, like vacant eyes, stared out from the building. They offered no warmth, only a reflection of the fear that clung to the building. The hospital was in the heart of the city, yet it felt a world away. The city's energy stopped at the edge of the hospital grounds. It was as if the building itself exuded an aura of unease, an invisible barrier keeping everyone at bay. The hospital had been abandoned for decades. No one dared to approach it, not in the daylight, and certainly not at night, for the hospital held a dark secret, a secret that whispered on the wind, a secret that chilled the bones of even the bravest soul. The hospital had once been a beacon of hope, a place of healing, but that was a distant memory. Now it was a place of fear, a place of shadows and whispers, a place where the dead refused to die. Locals told stories. They spoke of strange occurrences, unexplained noises, flickering lights, and shadowy figures moving through the abandoned halls. Some whispered of a vengeful spirit. A woman in white, they said, a former nurse, driven to madness by the horrors she had witnessed. The stories were just that, stories. Urban legends, nothing more, or so they told themselves, but deep down, they knew better. They could feel it. The hospital was a place of evil, a place to be avoided. It was a Friday night. The air was thick with anticipation. A group of university students stood at the edge of the hospital grounds. They were young, they were foolish, and they were about to make a terrible mistake. There were 5 of them. Kenji, the leader of the group. He was a thrill-seeker, always pushing the boundaries. Next to him stood his girlfriend Hana. She was hesitant, but she wouldn't let Kenji go alone. Then there was Daisuke, the class clown. He tried to mask his fear with humor, but his nervous laughter betrayed his true feelings. Rounding out the group were the twins, Akiko and Yumi, quiet and observant. Their eyes darted around, taking in every detail of their surroundings. They had heard the stories, the legends, the warnings, but they didn't believe them. They were young, they were invincible, or so they thought. Tonight they would learn the truth. They would come face to face with the darkness that lurked within the hospital walls. The air inside the hospital was heavy. It was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their own breathing and the sound of their own heartbeats. They walked slowly, carefully. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the horrors within. The walls were lined with beds, rusty and stripped bare. Medical equipment lay scattered on the floor, covered in dust and cobwebs. The air grew colder as they ventured deeper into the hospital. The silence was broken only by the sound of their own footsteps. Each step echoed through the empty halls, a constant reminder that they were not alone. They could feel it, watching them. They were being watched. Section 5. A sea of charts. They reached the nurses' station. It was a chaotic mess. Charts and files were scattered everywhere. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and dust. Kenji picked up a chart. He brushed the dust off it. The name on the chart was barely visible. Suzuki Haru, he read aloud. Hana shivered. "This place is creepy," she whispered. "Can we go now?" Kenji laughed. "Don't be scared," he said. "It's just an old hospital." But even he couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. Daisuke picked up a syringe. He pretended to inject himself. "I'm a doctor," he said, his voice trembling. "The doctor is in!" Akiko and Yumi said nothing. They just stood there, watching, waiting. Section 6, the doctor's journal. Kenji noticed a door slightly ajar. He pushed it open. It was a doctor's office. A desk sat in the middle of the room. A journal lay open on the desk. Kenji walked over to the desk and picked up the journal. The cover was old and worn. The pages were yellowed with age. The writing was in Japanese. He began to read aloud. "The patients are dying," he read, "but I can't save them. There's something else here, something evil. It's here in the hospital. I can feel it. It's watching me. It's toying with me. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to turn to." Kenji stopped reading. He looked up. His heart pounded in his chest. He could feel a presence in the room. A cold spot settled over him. He felt a chill run down his spine. He quickly put the journal down and backed away from the desk. He turned to his friends. His face was pale. Section 7. The cold spot. We need to leave, he said. Now, the others could see the fear in his eyes. They didn't argue. They turned and ran out of the room. They ran down the hallway. Their flashlights bounced off the walls, creating a dizzying array of light and shadow. But as they ran, the temperature dropped. The air grew heavy. It became difficult to breathe. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever. They could hear the sound of their own footsteps echoing behind them. But there was something else too. Something was following them. They could feel its presence, cold and menacing. It was gaining on them. Section 8. Spectral Savior. They burst out of the hospital and into the night. They gasped for air. Their hearts pounded in their chests. They had made it. They were safe. Or so they thought. As they turned to leave, they saw her, a woman in a white nurse's uniform. She was standing at the window of the hospital. Her face was pale and drawn. Her eyes were filled with sadness, and then she was gone. They stared at the window for a moment. Their breath caught in their throats. They couldn't believe what they had just seen. Section 9. Lingering dread. They ran. They didn't stop running until they were far away from the hospital. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They had all seen her. They had all felt her presence. They knew then that the stories were true. The hospital was haunted, and they had been lucky to escape with their lives. They never spoke of that night again, but they could never forget it. The memory of the hospital and the woman in white would haunt them forever. Section 10. Unsettled Spirits. The hospital still stands, a decaying monument to the horrors that transpired within its walls. The locals still whisper the stories, the legends, the warnings, but no one dares to go near it, not at night, for they know that the hospital is not empty. It is still home to the spirits of those who died there, and they are still waiting for someone to hear their cries, waiting for someone to help them find peace. They are the unsettled spirits of the abandoned hospital, and they will never rest.